Hello, this is Dr. Harriet Fraad, bringing you Capitalism Hits Home, a podcast brought to you by Democracy at Work. Democracy at Work is a small donor-funded organization, nonprofit, that brings to you podcasts that make the world make sense. We want you to subscribe so that you can be in the know, so that you can be part of our social media presence, and so that we can get to know you and you can get to know us. Go to Democracy at Work, press the red subscribe button, and you will be even closer to us than you are now. So thank you. I'll remind you at the end too. Today, I want to talk about an important topic. It's a topic that's related to other topics I've talked about, like mass murder. One of the things I've been trying to understand is why it is that 97% of the mass murderers, and in America at the moment, we are the world leader in mass murders, we have more than one a day. Why is it always men who do these mass murders? Why isn't it women? In fact, as I said before, 97% of mass murders are done by men, and 3% are done by women, and those 3% are done by women assisting the men who are doing the mass murders. So I also want to answer another question. Why, even with the first wave of feminism, with Susan B. Anthony and trying to get the vote at the turn of the century and a little before, and even with second wave feminism in the late 60s, early 70s, and until now, why has no one asked the question, what does one learn from taking care of vulnerable life, taking care of people who don't speak? What does one learn from nurturing and taking care of children? What does one learn from creating the conditions of existence for life, like cleanliness and order and an aesthetic surrounding? We've never found out those things, but they're important skills. They're important for women to know, particularly when they apply for jobs, so that they can talk about the skills they've been developing if they've been at home. How did women get in the position we're in now? The position of doing care work and getting paid so much less than equivalent men's work. Pink-collar jobs are paid much less than blue-collar, white-collar, or managerial or executive jobs. And 80% of women are in pink-collar jobs, jobs where women are concentrated. And what do I mean where women are concentrated? Well, I looked it up on the internet, and I have a list of the places where women work is concentrated, and they're all in assistance to men or in jobs related to childcare or care for the elderly or emotional care or food preparation and other cleaning occupations. In education, they're all preschool teachers, maybe 99.99% of preschool teachers and daycare workers are women. And they're paid around, preschool teachers, daycare workers are paid around $11.40 an hour, which is remarkable. They're paid less than parking lot attendants for watching and trying to develop children. Also in healthcare, they are the assistants. They're the lab techs. They're the nurses assisting the doctors. In dentistry, they're the dental hygienist or the dental assistant. In psychiatry, which takes care of people to some extent, they tend to be the social workers and therapists and counselors, not the highly paid psychiatrists. They're the nutritionists who teach you about food. In banks, underneath the executives, which are usually men. They are the bank teller. They're the bookkeeper. And throughout business, they're often the human resource manager because women are known to deal with people better because they're caring, they're not as aggressive. In offices, they're the receptionist, welcoming you, showing that the firm cares about you when you walk in. They're the secretary, assisting the executive. They're the data entry clerk, doing backup. And they're the people organized around beauty, physical beauty, and interior decoration. They're the interior decorators, but they're also the hairstylists, the cosmetologists, the personal shoppers who help you pick out what would look nice on you, and the higher paid modeling people. Models are higher paid if they're women. There's only two fields where women get routinely higher pay. One is sex work, and which includes, pornographic videos or giving people sex, sexual satisfaction, and modeling. Women are usually not pilots. We're the flight attendants. We're the casino hosts, not the people running the games. At home, we're the babysitter, as an extension of our female role in taking care of children. When you go shopping, we're usually the retail people who are there showing you the things and helping you find what you need. We're the food preparation workers in cafeterias and in lower paid restaurants. The most highly prestigious restaurants have overwhelmingly male chefs, so that we are in this inferior position. And I want to find out, A, how did we get there? And in a later podcast, also, how do we get out of those positions? And also, why we don't commit mass murders. Why is that a male job? And so I'm trying to figure out, okay, how did we get into this? What happened? Well, the best theory I've found from looking around quite a bit is Friedrich Engels' theory, which was picked up by Reed and many others, which is that in the beginning of human life, we lived in bands of equals. We were a communal species because we had no choice. We're not the fastest animals. We don't have the best sense of smell. We don't have the best vision. We don't have the sharpest teeth. We don't hear the best. We don't have the best sense of smell. What we have is the ability to organize together and to cooperate. And so the earliest people lived in bands. None of them could take on a large animal if they wanted to eat their meat, but they could make a lot of noise, drive the animal into a pit that they dug communally, and then communally carve it up and share the meat, which they did in a communal way because they wouldn't have survived otherwise. Women who were often pregnant and had young children to feed, because one can breastfeed till about 5 years old, needed to stay around more of a home place, and their roles were equally important to the group. They were gatherers. They weren't the hunters, they were the gatherers. They gathered the nuts, the berries, the fruits, the plants on which people lived every day, as well as the grubs that grew around them for protein. Whereas men banded together as hunters to catch whatever meat they could get and also to get animal skins, which people used as clothing. Whereas women made pottery because they could dig up the clay locally and they could shape it into pottery to hold their grains and foods so that they could keep them in times when they weren't ripening and ready. So communal living and egalitarian living were the rule, and men and women were equal, as they were in the early societies that we found, that the invaders like Christopher Columbus found when they came to America. They were native tribes like the Iroquois or the Cherokee or all the others. And men and women were equal. What happened? Well, partly the link in many groups for a long time, they didn't understand the link between having sex and reproduction. And therefore, women were very important because they did a very neat trick, which is creating other people. But what happened? What happened to allow men and women to live more separate lives and men to dominate over women? Well, at first, people just hunted. But then after a while, they developed the idea that by having herds of animals in extensive lands, they could count on where their meat was coming from, where their skins were coming from, and so on. And so men went further afield. Women had to stay near home because they were bound to children through breastfeeding and pregnancy. And as men accumulated herds, they became a source of wealth. Also, as people figured out the relationship between reproduction and sex, men wanted their herd lands to be inherited by their children. And therefore, the idea that you better control women so you know who your children are became much more important with private property. There's a very famous conversation between a missionary from the Catholic Church from Europe and a Native American. And the missionary saying to the Native American man, you better watch out what your women are doing. You don't even know who your children are. And the man said, what do you mean? They're all my children. I'm not worried. They're all my children. Very different concept, because one is you have to own women and their reproductive capacities, and the other is we're all in this together. I don't care if it's my sperms or somebody else's. Women became disempowered because they needed to stay more near a home base, and because wealth accumulated in the hands of men. Communal sharing was therefore compromised, and the religions of the early herders reflected that. The earliest people worshipped female gods, partly because the trick of being able to make other people was considered a female trick. And they worshipped fertility because it brought forth other animals, because it brought forth more plants and more nuts and fruits and berries that they ate. And so that they worshipped female gods or male and female gods who were very much equal. As the economy changed to a male-dominated ownership economy, religion changed. People had nomadic herds, and the Abrahamic religions, Christianity, Judaism, and the Muslim religion developed, in which women were decidedly inferior. In the Bible, which is their Bible, the Bible of the Abrahamic male chauvinist religions, Eve, a woman, was born out of Adam's rib, big reversal to the birth story we all know about. And in the Garden of Eden, the snake tempts Adam and Eve. Eve takes a bite, gives Adam a bite, and God casts them out of paradise. And God says to Eve, in sorrow shall thee bring forth children, and thy husband shall rule over thee. So God himself decrees male dominance and female subordination, which is carried out in the rest of the Bible as well. So women's work in the Bible was to serve men, sexually and in every other way. God dictates at one point about conquering the pagans, and he says, the young women take for yourself. The women married with men slaughter those women and the men who went with them. So it's that you can appropriate the sexuality over women and dominate them. Well, nomadic society and herd ownership is obviously not the way we survive today. And yet the devaluation of women perseveres. Femicide, i.e. killing women, is a big problem the world over. In the United States, the biggest cause of death of women between 15 and 44 years old is being killed by a husband, lover, or lover wannabe, which is quite remarkable. So we have to learn, what are the differences here? What do we learn for caring for vulnerable life that makes us so much less violent? What do we learn from what I'd call now, after the pandemic, is essential labor? Feeding people, caring for them, making sure they can stay alive. Because during the pandemic, essential labor was not the highly paid hedge fund operators. We don't need them. Or stock market brokers. It was preparing and serving food and caring for people's health, which are jobs overwhelmingly done by women. Child rearing, creating cleanliness and order, and caring for people emotionally as well as physically. So we have to understand how gender came about in order to change it so that we're not in such a gendered society. Women now earn 80% of male wages. Our caring work and our work behind the scenes, because women still do the majority of the cleanliness, the cooking, the serving, the maintaining of family life and of human life, is devalued and underpaid. And of course, as always, the intellectual establishment was there with its rationales of injustice. It was there to say that women do those jobs because it's the instinct of women. That's how women are instinctually expressing themselves, taking care of chosen men and children and making homes. There's no difference in the male and female brain. There are no thorough studies of gender that show there are. There is instinct, doesn't matter much for humans. When you're born the size of a small fist like that, by the time you die, it's the size of a Nerf football. And the thing that makes the difference is not instinct, which is there from the start. It's social connection that begins with an emotion. When neurons start to connect, ideas form, habits form, patterns form. We're social creatures overwhelmingly, not biological, instinctual creatures. That's why it takes human beings so long to be actually independent and viable. If you give birth to an elephant or a giraffe, after it's licked off, it gets up and walks and goes over to find its mother to feed. Not people. We're the longest dependent creatures in the whole animal kingdom. Second to longest are elephants. That takes 2 years. But a 2-year-old is utterly unviable if they're a human. It takes 10 or 11 years for human beings to be viable. And so we need a lot of care. We need to be not only fed, but we need to be cleaned. We need to be taught to walk. We need to be taught to speak. We don't need to be taught by the book, but we need to hear those sounds around us to have any way of negotiating our world independently. And someone has to be around to help with that caring labor. And women are taught from the earliest times in our lives that it's we who will be in charge of that. Boys have, in America, in Europe, this isn't so in a toy store, but in a toy store in the United States, you see toys for males, which are like guns, rock'em sock'em robots, and often very other aggressive toys. Toys in the girls section are much more like dolls, children's play makeup kits, and gentle games that encourage nurturance. You don't have to be actually having a child or planning to have a child to know that our job is to care for people. We learn it in children's books. We learn it in the toys we play with. And from the moment we're hot out of the womb, we are gendered. They studied nurses in neonatal units in New York City, which at least used to be wrapped in a blue blanket if they were a boy and a pink blanket if they were a girl. And when they congratulate the new parent, they say, it's a girl or it's a boy. They don't say, it's a baby. And the nurses in the neonatal unit react differently to the girls and boys. They're more likely to say about a girl child, isn't she cute? Oh, you're going to be a beauty. Whereas to a male child, aren't you a little tough guy? Aren't you strong? And so on. And so it starts instantly. By 1.5 to 3 years old, children know their gender and they can't reverse it. So that even if children are chromosomally and hormonally female, if they're brought up as male, it's easier to change their physical anatomy than it is to change their orientation to life. The same things with male. So that we know that differences are learned. In the next installment, the next podcast, what I want to talk about is I want to talk about what this means in our society and also how to change it so that we're all nurturers, so that we're socialized to take care of one another and be kind to one another. At the end of this podcast, which is right now, I want to ask you to please join us. You've already joined us if you're listening, and I'm glad you did. And I want you to suggest to your friends who might be interested that they join us. Thank you so much. Goodbye for now.